A courtroom packed with reporters, a millionaire smirking beside his mistress, and a pregnant woman standing alone, terrified, but refusing to step back. No one expects what happens next. In front of the entire court, the mistress launches forward and kicks the woman straight in the stomach, sending shockwaves through the room. What they do not know is that the judge watching from the bench is not just any judge. He is the father she never knew, and tonight is the moment everything breaks open. This story is about abuse power and the kind of justice that hits harder than anyone imagined. Tell us what time you are watching and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The morning air outside the Seattle family court felt heavy, as if the city itself sensed that something irreversible was about to happen. Reporters crowded the steps, adjusting microphones and cameras, while waiting for the people at the center of the scandal to arrive. Supporters of women's rights stood behind barricades, holding signs about justice for victims of domestic abuse. On the opposite side, admirers of Grant Donovan, the tech millionaire with a perfectly curated public image, gathered with posters declaring his innocence. Between the two groups, the tension was sharp enough to feel in the air. Hannah Miller paused at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She was 29 years old and 7 months pregnant, her belly round beneath a simple pale blue maternity dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the thin cardigan around her shoulders. She had never imagined her marriage would end in a courtroom. She had never imagined the father of her unborn child would bring her to a place like this. But fear or not, she needed to be here. She took a slow breath, placed a protective hand over her stomach, and began to climb the steps. The camera shutters exploded with noise. A reporter shouted her name, asking how she felt. Another asked whether the rumors of emotional instability were true. Hannah kept her gaze down and walked as steadily as she could. She reminded herself that her child needed her strong. Her child needed her alive. A black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. The crowd shifted immediately, shouting louder. Grant Donovan stepped out first. His suit looked tailored to perfection, his hair styled, his expression relaxed. He had the confidence of a man used to bending the world to his will. Beside him, stepping out elegantly in a fitted white dress, was Bella Hart. Bella was 31, flawless, glamorous, and smiling, as if red carpet lights were hitting her instead of the gray Seattle daylight. Grant and Bella walked side by side, laughing softly at something private. They looked like a couple arriving at a gala instead of a court hearing. The contrast between their polished appearance and Hannah's anxious, vulnerable posture made the crowd murmur. Some of Grant's supporters cheered for him. Others gasped in disbelief at Bella's presence. Inside the courthouse, the tension intensified. The courtroom was cold and quiet, with high ceilings that made even the faintest sounds echo. Hannah sat at the petitioner's table with her attorney. She tried to focus on her breathing. Her heart pounded, and every movement inside the courtroom felt like it was happening around her with exaggerated importance. At the front of the room sat Judge Samuel Hayes. His silver hair and calm posture reflected years of experience. He surveyed the room with disciplined composure, but when his eyes landed on Hannah, something flickered behind them. He had no logical explanation for the sensation, yet he felt an odd familiarity when he looked at her. It was not recognition. It was something deeper and unspoken. Still, he forced himself to remain professional. The hearing began. Hannah's attorney stood and outlined her request for protection support and primary custody. The argument was measured based on documented patterns of control and emotional abuse. Hannah kept her hand over her belly, feeling her baby move beneath her skin, as if sensing the tension. Grant's attorney rose with a rehearsed expression of concern. He claimed Hannah suffered from emotional instability. He said she misinterpreted events. He even suggested she had a tendency toward exaggeration during pregnancy. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably at that phrasing, but Grant sat back proudly confident in the narrative he had paid to build. Behind Grant, Bella sat with her arms crossed, her lips curved into a smirk. Every time Hannah's name was mentioned, Bella whispered something under her breath, rolling her eyes. Her contempt felt so blatant that even Grant's attorney gave her subtle glances as if silently urging her to act normal. When Hannah's attorney mentioned Grant's infidelity and the financial pressure he used to force Hannah to sign an unfair marital agreement, Bella exploded. She stood abruptly and shouted, "She is lying! She is absolutely lying!" Her voice echoed across the room. Judge Hayes slammed his gavel. "Ms. Hart, sit down. You are not permitted to interrupt these proceedings." Grant reached back calmly and placed a hand on Bella's arm. It was a gentle but possessive gesture, as if reassuring her that he was still in control. Bella sank back into her seat, her jaw clenched, but her eyes radiated fury. The judge motioned for Hannah to speak. Hannah stood slowly, her hand still on her stomach. She spoke quietly but clearly. She described nights when Grant cut her access to money. She described weeks when he refused to let her see friends. She described the threats disguised as concerns about her mental clarity. As she spoke, the courtroom grew still. Even people who came in skeptical found themselves listening. Cameras outside the courtroom pressed against the narrow windows. Hannah felt exposed, but also strangely determined. She wanted the truth heard. She wanted her baby to know she tried. Bella could not stand the attention shifting away from her. She whispered something to Grant, but he kept staring straight ahead. Anger built in her face. She gripped the edge of her seat so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Then it happened. Bella jumped to her feet with explosive fury. She is faking. She is acting. She is trying to ruin him. Her voice took on a sharp, almost shrill edge. Before anyone could react, Bella stepped forward and delivered a violent kick straight into Hannah's abdomen. A collective scream rose from the courtroom. Hannah collapsed instantly, falling to the wooden floor. Her hands clutched her stomach as her body curled forward. A sharp cry escaped her lips, full of terror and instinctive pain. Fluid spilled onto the courtroom floor. The sound of it hitting the wood made several people gasp. The room erupted. Reporters yelled. Attorneys stumbled over chairs. Security lunged forward. Judge Hayes froze for a split second. Then something inside him snapped. His face drained of color. His voice, usually calm and steady, burst out in a shout that shook the room. "Security. Call an ambulance. Now." His eyes were fixed on Hannah, who lay trembling on the floor, struggling to breathe, her fingers trembling as they tried desperately to protect the life inside her. And for reasons he could not yet understand, the sight hit him with a pain he had never felt before. The world around Hannah dissolved into a blur of lights, footsteps, and shouting voices as the paramedics rushed her out of the courtroom. She could still feel the echo of the kick in her abdomen, a deep, exploding pain that pulsed through her entire body. Every bump of the gurney made her catch her breath. She tried to keep her hands pressed against her stomach, as if her palms could protect the small life inside her from further harm. Her tears soaked into the side of her face and into the blanket covering her. The courthouse doors burst open and the gurney rolled into the waiting ambulance. Hannah could hear the faint alarm of the ambulance equipment as the paramedics moved quickly. One paramedic leaned over her. His voice was steady but urgent. He told her to stay awake. He told her to breathe. He told her they were doing everything they could. Hannah tried to nod, but her throat felt tight, and breathing became harder with every second. The siren wailed as the ambulance sped through traffic. The red lights flashing against the windows made the interior look even more chaotic. A paramedic pressed a monitor to her abdomen, searching for the fetal heartbeat. The loud, rhythmic beeping filled the back of the truck. Hannah stared at the ceiling, fighting the rising terror inside her. She whispered to her baby, telling it to hold on. She did not even know whether the child could hear her, but speaking felt like the only control she had left. When they arrived at the hospital, the paramedics pushed the gurney down a long hallway. The bright fluorescent lights overhead made Hannah squint. Nurses moved quickly around her, calling out instructions, clearing pathways, preparing equipment. A doctor rushed to her side. His voice came through sharply and urgently. He said she was 28 weeks. He said they needed to stabilize both mother and baby. Hannah heard the words but could not process them fully. Every sound overlapped with the echo of the kick and the fear gripping her chest. They brought her into a monitoring room. Cold gel touched her abdomen. Sensors were attached. A machine hummed to life and began producing the rhythmic beeping of the fetal heart monitor. The sound became Hannah's entire world. Each beep felt like a thread connecting her to hope. Each slight pause made her heart skid. She struggled to breathe through the panic, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The doctor told her to stay still while they checked for signs of internal bleeding and uterine distress. Nurses moved around her, adjusting the bed, attaching IV lines, checking her pulse. The air smelled strongly of disinfectant. Hannah stared at the ceiling tiles, trying to blink away the tears that kept filling her eyes. She wanted to be brave. She wanted to stay calm. But the terror of losing the baby was overwhelming. She felt as if her entire life rested on the steady beeping of the machine beside her. A nurse turned on the television mounted in the corner of the waiting area outside her room. Although the door was partially closed, Hannah could still hear the voices from the broadcast. A breaking news alert played repeatedly. The headline said that a pregnant woman had been kicked inside a courtroom by a millionaire's mistress. Then, the video began. Hannah recognized the moment instantly. The screen captured Bella lurching forward, and the violent arc of her leg as it connected with Hannah's abdomen. Reporters argued over details. Commentators debated what had happened. The sound of her own cry echoed faintly from the television, and it made Hannah's body tense with humiliation and fear. She turned her face away and closed her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks. Her baby moved weakly inside her, and she clutched the side of the bed, praying silently that the movement was a good sign. She felt painfully alone. She wished someone was there to sit with her, to hold her hand, to reassure her that she would not lose her child. But the room felt too big and too empty. The only steady sound was the fetal monitor. Her phone vibrated on the side table. The nurse handed it to her gently, thinking it might be a family member. Hannah answered with shaking hands. Grant's voice filled the room. It was cold, sharp, and disturbingly calm. He told her not to speak to the press. He told her not to accuse him of abuse. He told her that if she dared to use the incident in court, he would take the baby from her. He reminded her that he had money and lawyers. He reminded her that she would lose if she fought him. Hannah closed her eyes, gripping the phone. She could barely speak. She felt the words cut deeper than the pain in her abdomen. When she hung up, her hand trembled so violently that the phone almost slipped from her grasp. A few minutes later, another message appeared, this one from Bella. It contained only 5 words. Next time, I will not miss. Hannah stared at the text until her vision blurred. Her stomach tightened again with pain. She tried to breathe, but her chest felt constricted. The room suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too suffocating. A soft hand touched hers. Hannah opened her eyes and saw an older nurse standing beside the bed. The woman introduced herself as Helen Harter. Her voice was gentle but firm. She told Hannah she had seen husbands like Grant Donovan before. She told her not to sign anything. She told her that men who used power to control their wives always escalated when threatened. Hannah listened to Helen's voice and felt a small thread of comfort pull her back from panic. It was the first compassion she had felt since collapsing on the courtroom floor. Night settled outside the hospital windows. The lights in the room dimmed, but Hannah could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Bella's foot coming toward her. Every time the fetal monitor beeped, she felt relief. Every slightest pause made her heart drop. Shadows on the walls shifted with the movements of passing nurses. The quiet hum of machines filled the silence. Hannah lay in the darkness, listening to the heartbeat of her baby and praying the rhythm would not change. Near midnight, her phone vibrated again. She almost ignored it, afraid it was another threat. But when she opened the message, she froze. The email had no name and no signature. It contained only a single sentence. "If you are Hannah Miller, I think I am your father." The phone slipped slightly in her hand as she stared at the words. Her breath caught. The room felt colder. Questions swirled in her mind. She felt fear, confusion, disbelief, and a sudden, impossible spark of hope. The monitor continued its steady beeping beside her. She held the phone to her chest, unsure whether the message was a mistake or the beginning of something she had never dared to imagine. 48 hours after the attack in the courtroom, the story had already spread across every major news outlet in the country. The incident replayed on television all day, yet what the public saw was not the truth. Grant Donovan's public relations team worked around the clock, releasing a carefully edited video that cut out the most incriminating moments. In their version of the footage, the angle conveniently shifted just before Bella's foot struck Hannah's abdomen. The narrative pushed to the media suggested that Hannah had tripped and fallen toward Bella. Headlines repeated the same phrasing. Reporters repeated the same talking points. Anyone who did not witness the attack firsthand would have difficulty knowing what truly happened. A talk show known for defending wealthy and influential men aired a segment titled, "Is the Public Being Manipulated?" The program invited a psychologist who spoke confidently about hormone instability during pregnancy. She said pregnant women often misinterpreted events. She suggested that Hannah may have acted out of emotional stress. What the audience did not know was that this so-called expert had been paid by Grant's PR team. Her performance served only one purpose: to make Hannah appear unreliable. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Hannah struggled to process all of it. She had not left her room since being admitted. She had not looked at the television again after hearing the sound of her own scream echoing from the courtroom video. The fetal monitor beside her continued its steady beeping, but her fear had not lessened. Every time the beeping slowed, she held her breath. Every time the baby moved, she whispered silent reassurances. Her attorney had not yet arrived, and her medical bills were growing. She knew she did not have the money for a prolonged legal fight. The thought terrified her. When Grant's attorney arrived with a stack of documents, the terror deepened. The attorney spoke with rehearsed sympathy. He explained that Grant was willing to be generous. He offered Hannah a financial settlement that required her to remain silent. She would have limited visitation rights when the baby was born. She would not speak publicly about the attack. She would not accuse Grant of abuse. She would sign away most of her marital claims. It was presented as a lifeline, but the intention was clear. They wanted to shut her down. Hannah held the papers in her hands with trembling fingers. She felt small, cornered, and unsure. She had no lawyer to protect her. She had no savings large enough to stand against Grant's resources. The threat he had made over the phone, the threat to take her baby, echoed relentlessly inside her mind. Signing the papers felt like giving up her entire future. Refusing them felt like stepping into a war she could not win. The attorney left the envelope on her bedside table and walked out without waiting for her answer. The door closed quietly behind him. Hannah stared at the thick envelope. It seemed to grow heavier the longer she looked at it. Her breathing grew shallow. As she sat there frozen, Nurse Helen stepped into the room. She had been assigned to Hannah since the moment she arrived, and she had watched the young woman struggle to hold herself together. Helen recognized the tightness in Hannah's shoulders and the distant look in her eyes. She approached softly and asked whether she was all right. Hannah said nothing, only glanced toward the envelope. Helen walked over, picked it up, and read the heading with narrowed eyes. Helen had seen these types of agreements before. She had witnessed other women pressured into silence by wealthy husbands. She knew that once Hannah signed, everything would become much harder to undo. Without saying a word, Helen pulled out her phone and discreetly photographed the documents. Then she looked at Hannah with a steady, reassuring expression. She told her not to sign anything. She told her that there were people who could help. She told her that Grant's power was not absolute, no matter how invincible he seemed. Hannah felt a small surge of relief, fragile yet real. Outside the hospital walls, the public remained sharply divided. Hannah's name appeared everywhere on social media. Some people defended her, stating that no woman, especially a pregnant woman, would fake being kicked in a courtroom. Others mocked her, calling her a liar, a drama seeker, or a gold digger. Comment sections became battlegrounds filled with insults. The cruelty of strangers seeped into the narrative, making Hannah feel even more exposed. Inside the courthouse, however, a different kind of battle was beginning. Judge Samuel Hayes sat in his private chambers with the blinds partially closed. He stared at the stack of files on his desk. Something about Hannah had stayed with him long after the courtroom emptied. He could not shake the feeling that her pain meant more to him than that of any stranger. It unsettled him. It also compelled him to act. He directed his clerk to retrieve the full security footage from the courtroom, not the edited clips circulating in the media, but the raw, uncut footage recorded from the overhead camera and the camera behind the witness stand. When the files were delivered, Samuel closed his office door and played the footage alone. The grainy video showed everything clearly. Hannah standing nervously, Bella glaring at her. The moment Bella lunged forward with fury etched across her face. The violent kick, Hannah collapsing. The camera also captured Hannah's expression, not of performance or exaggeration, but of genuine horror. Samuel paused the video on her face. A strange ache spread through his chest. He leaned closer to the screen and studied her features. Her eyes, her expression. Something familiar lived in those details. He reached into a drawer and pulled out an old envelope that had remained sealed for years. Inside it were photographs of a woman named Laura Miller. She had been Samuel's first love. They met when he was young and idealistic. They planned a life together. Then one day, without explanation, she disappeared. No note, no call, nothing. He searched for her for years, but every lead ended in silence. And now, as he studied Hannah's face on the monitor, memories of Laura flooded back with unsettling clarity. He opened his laptop and searched the public records. He found Hannah's birthplace. He found basic details about her mother. He found the dates and locations. One by one, the pieces aligned. Her age matched exactly with the year he lost contact with Laura. Her mother's name matched the woman he once loved. The more he connected the dots, the more his breath caught in his throat. For the first time since he became a judge, Samuel felt his hands shake. Everything pointed toward one devastating and unbelievable conclusion. Hannah Miller, The woman lying in a hospital bed after being kicked by a millionaire's mistress might be the daughter he lost decades ago. He closed the file slowly and stared at the wall. His heart beat unevenly. His thoughts spiraled. Hope mixed with fear, and the weight of the revelation settled over him like a storm waiting to break. The late afternoon sunlight drifted through the blinds of the hospital room, casting long strips of pale gold across the walls. Hannah lay propped against her pillows, staring at the ceiling without really seeing it. She felt drained, both physically and emotionally. The steady beeping of the fetal monitor beside her had become the soundtrack of her days and nights. Each sound reassured her that her baby was still hanging on, still fighting. But the fear of what might happen next clung to her like a shadow she could not escape. Her eyelids felt heavy. She wanted to rest, but her mind refused to quiet. The video being spread online, the lies, the threats from Grant, the legal documents waiting on the bedside table, and the strange email claiming someone might be her father. She did not know what to believe anymore. The uncertainty twisted inside her chest. A soft click interrupted the silence. The door opened slowly. Hannah turned her head, expecting a nurse or perhaps Helen coming in to check on her. Instead, she saw a man step into the room. He was tall, with silver hair combed neatly back, wearing a pressed shirt and a dark jacket. His face was composed, yet lined with something heavier than age alone. "I am sorry to disturb you," he said quietly, almost cautiously. "My name is Samuel Hayes." Hannah blinked. For a moment, she did not place the name. Then, recognition struck her. The judge, the man who had sat at the front of the courtroom when her entire world had collapsed. She felt her stomach tighten. She shifted slightly upright, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was soft, but wary. "Is something wrong with my case?" He shook his head slowly. "I am not here in any official capacity." He stepped closer, but not too close, as if afraid of overwhelming her. "I know you may not want to see me. I understand that. But I believed it was important to speak with you." Hannah felt tension rush to her shoulders. She assumed he was here to tell her to reconsider the legal battle or perhaps to warn her about speaking to the media. Judges were not supposed to get involved like this. Something about his presence felt strange. She swallowed hard. "If this is about the hearing," she said carefully, "I know the situation was chaotic, and I know you must be under pressure, but I did not lie about anything." "I know you didn't," he replied immediately, surprising her. The sincerity in his voice made her pause. "This is not about the hearing. This is about something else entirely." She frowned, confused. Samuel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Hannah tensed again, unsure of what he would produce. When he pulled out a small, slightly worn photograph, he held it gently as if it were something precious. "I have reason to believe," he said quietly, "that I might be your father." Hannah stared at him, stunned. For a moment her mind went blank. She looked at the photograph in his hand. He extended it slowly toward her. With trembling fingers, she took it. The picture showed a young woman with soft eyes and long hair standing beside a much younger version of the man now in her hospital room. The woman looked familiar, not because Hannah had ever seen her in person, but because her mother had kept only one photo from her youth in an old drawer. It was the same woman. It was Laura Miller. Hannah's breath hitched, her pulse quickened. She felt as though the ground beneath her was tilting. "That is my mother?" she whispered. Samuel nodded. His eyes held a mix of sadness and hope. "I met her many years ago. We were very young. My family disapproved. She left without telling me she was pregnant. I searched for her for years, but never found where she went." Hannah looked down at the photograph again. Her mother had never spoken about Hannah's father. Every question Hannah had asked through her childhood had been deflected or brushed aside with vague answers. Hannah had always assumed he had abandoned them or that he simply did not care. To hear this now was like having a curtain pulled back on a part of her life she never expected to see clearly. "Why now?" she asked. Her voice wavered between shock and anger. Why, after all this time, Samuel's chest rose and fell with a steadying breath. "When I saw you in that courtroom, something struck me. The way you looked. Something in your face. A familiarity I could not explain. I ignored it at first. Judges are trained to remain detached. But when I saw the unedited video, when I saw the necklace around your neck, I recognized it." Hannah instinctively touched the small necklace resting against her collarbone. It had belonged to her mother. She had worn it since the day her mother passed away. Laura wore that necklace the day she left. Samuel continued, "I gave it to her when we were young. I never saw it again until it was around your neck." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. She was overwhelmed. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part wanted to shield herself from more pain. She pressed a hand to her stomach, grounding herself. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not need to say anything right now." Samuel replied gently, "You have been through something terrible, and you are fighting for your child. The last thing I want is to add to your burden. But if the possibility is true, then I owe you the truth, and I owe you protection." "I am angry," Hannah said quietly. "If you are my father, why did you not find us sooner?" He nodded slowly. "I deserve that question, and I cannot change what happened. I can only tell you that I tried. I did not know where she went. She disappeared from every place I searched. If you choose to take a DNA test, and if it confirms what I believe, then I want to stand by you now. I want to help protect you and your baby." He stepped back slightly, giving her space. "I will withdraw from your case to avoid any conflict of interest, but privately, I can help. I can hire an attorney who specializes in cases like this, someone who will not be intimidated by Grant Donovan." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Her emotions swirled chaotically, but beneath the confusion was a small spark of something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Fragile, yet real. Samuel placed a small envelope on the table beside her. Inside was information for a DNA test. "Take your time," he said softly. "Whatever you choose, I will respect it." He turned to leave. Hannah stared at the envelope, her hand resting protectively on her belly. For the first time since the attack, she did not feel entirely alone. The following morning, the hospital room felt unusually quiet. Hannah sat upright in her bed, exhausted but alert, waiting for the visitor Judge Hayes had told her about. She did not know what to expect. Her life had changed drastically within days. Every hour brought new information, new fear, or new uncertainty. She could only hope that whoever was coming would help her rather than place another burden on her already trembling shoulders. A firm knock sounded at the door. When it opened, a woman stepped inside with confident strides. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase tucked beneath her arm. Her presence filled the room immediately. Her hair, streaked lightly with gray, was tied back in a clean twist, and her expression carried both authority and conviction. "You must be Hannah Miller," the woman said, offering her hand. "I am Mary Collins." Hannah shook her hand. Mary's grip was steady, reassuring and strong in a way that made Hannah exhale, the breath she had not realized she was holding. "Judge Hayes asked me to come," Mary continued as she pulled a chair beside the bed. "He said, you need someone who will not hesitate to stand up to a man like Grant Donovan." Hannah nodded slowly. "He told me you were experienced." Mary opened her briefcase and took out several folders. That is one way to put it. I have handled cases involving powerful men who believe they can buy silence. When the judge mentioned Grant's name, I recognized it immediately. Hannah's eyebrows lifted. You did? Yes. Mary folded her hands. 5 years ago, his second wife died. The case was ruled a suicide. She was pregnant. 26 weeks. The official record stated she jumped from the balcony of their penthouse. Hannah's heart dropped. I did not know. I suspected from the start that something was wrong, Mary said. The timing, the circumstances, the inconsistencies in the medical report. But the case was closed quickly. Too quickly. A cold tremor crawled through Hannah's spine. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her baby shift beneath her palm. She swallowed hard. Mary then opened the first folder. Inside were printed news articles, old police memos, and several grainy photographs. Judge Hayes used his connections to retrieve the archives from the original investigation, and I requested a deeper pull from contacts within the Bureau. The Bureau? Hannah whispered. FBI. Mary nodded. Some parts of the file were difficult to obtain, but we have what matters. She lifted one photograph. It showed a balcony crime scene tape and a woman's purse lying on the ground. Another photo showed a pair of shoes positioned strangely far from the railing. Mary tapped the edge of the image. The detective assigned to the case suspected foul play. His notes indicated inconsistencies, including bruising patterns that did not match a fall. But before he could continue his investigation, he was removed from the case. The report was finalized under a different supervisor. The timing coincided with a very large anonymous donation to the precinct. Hannah stared at the photograph, horrified. You think Grant paid them off? I think Grant has a long history of paying off whoever he needs to. Mary opened another folder. And it gets darker. She slid a printed spreadsheet toward Hannah. These are records of offshore accounts linked to shell corporations. The transactions spiked dramatically the month before his wife's death, and again immediately after, with millions transferred to unregistered entities. Hannah covered her mouth with her hand. She felt sick. He planned it. We cannot say that yet, Mary replied carefully. But the pattern is troubling. As she continued explaining, Hannah noticed another set of photographs. These were camera stills from 5 years ago. Mary placed them on the table one by one. In each one, Grant and Bella Hart appeared together. Not as strangers or acquaintances, but as two people who clearly had a shared history. In this frame, Mary said, pointing to one image, Bella is seen arguing with Grant's second wife 3 days before her death. This footage was buried in the original files. If Bella has been in Grant's orbit for that long, then their relationship did not begin recently. And if she confronted the previous wife, she might have been involved in far more than we know. The air seemed to thicken around Hannah. She felt as if every breath weighed heavier. 30 minutes ago, she believed she was fighting Grant alone. Now she understood she might be dealing with a man who had destroyed another woman before her, a woman also carrying his child. Mary's voice softened. I know this is difficult to hear, but you need to understand the danger. Patterns like this rarely stop on their own. Nurse Helen knocked lightly and entered with a chart. She paused when she saw the table covered with photographs. I remember her, Helen said quietly. His second wife. She came to the hospital once. I noticed bruises on her arms, faded ones. When I mentioned documenting them, the attending physician told me to leave it alone. He said her husband was handling her care privately. Why would he say that, Hannah asked. Helen sighed. We now know the attending physician accepted donations from Grant for years. He bought equipment renovations and a few vacations. In return, he dismissed anything that could make Grant look bad. Mary nodded. It aligns with everything we found. Helen continued. She seemed afraid that day. I tried to talk to her, but she avoided eye contact. I never saw her again after that. When I heard about her death, I knew something was off. But no one asked the nurses for statements. Mary looked at Hannah. This is why we need to build a team. A quiet one. A careful one. She listed them in calm, precise order. Samuel has legal influence. I will handle strategic litigation. Helen will serve as a medical witness. And Detective Michael Rhodes, who worked on the earlier case before being removed, has agreed to help gather old leads. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. But it was also the first time Hannah felt the ground beneath her feet return. If Grant orchestrated something with his second wife, Hannah whispered, then the attack on me was not impulsive. It could be the beginning of the same pattern. Mary nodded solemnly. That is why we must act before he does. Hannah stared at the board Mary assembled on a portable rolling table. At the center was a photo of Grant, surrounded by the faces of women, files of financial transactions, maps of his properties, and timelines of deaths and disappearances. Red strings connected events across years. It looked exactly like something from a criminal investigation. It was also the first time Hannah truly understood the scope of the danger she was in, and the scope of what they had to do next. The storm that followed the emerging investigation did not intimidate Grant Donovan. In fact, it energized him. He had faced public scrutiny before and had always come out stronger. This time, he intended to crush the narrative before it took hold. Within 24 hours of learning that Hannah had retained legal representation, he contacted one of the most expensive public relations firms in the country. Their office occupied the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the city like a throne. They were known for reshaping scandals into sympathy. Grant arrived with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He brought a team of lawyers, a portfolio of carefully edited documents, and instructions for the strategy he wanted implemented. He insisted the public was being manipulated. He insisted Hannah was trying to extort him. He demanded that the PR firm craft a story highlighting his achievements, his charitable works, and his rise from a modest upbringing. He framed himself as a victim of a malicious plot. Within hours, the firm released a polished video titled "The Truth Behind the Courtroom Chaos." The clip portrayed Grant as calm and composed. It presented him as a supportive husband who tried to help a struggling wife. It hinted that Hannah's emotional instability had caused the incident in the courtroom. It suggested that Bella had only reacted out of fear. Commentators on certain networks echoed these claims, repeating the narrative word for word. The PR machine moved with precision, shaping perception in real time. The next phase of the plan included placing Bella in front of cameras. She appeared on a popular talk show dressed in soft colors, her face arranged into an expression of fragile remorse. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she described her version of the story. She said she had been afraid. She said Hannah lunged first. She said she reacted on instinct. She even claimed she prayed for the baby's safety every night. Her performance was emotional enough to convince some viewers. People who had not seen the unedited footage began to question what truly happened in the courtroom. The power of polished lies became painfully clear. Public polling shifted slightly in Grant's favor. Supporters of his technological empire defended him loudly. They called him a symbol of the American dream. They said men like him were always targeted by jealous spouses. They accused Hannah of chasing money. For a short time, Grant felt victorious. He reveled in watching the tide turn. But not everyone believed him. Not everyone was willing to accept Bella's performance. And one of the first to publicly push against the narrative was Samuel Hayes. Samuel appeared on a respected news channel known for investigative journalism and integrity. He was introduced as a retired federal judge, not as someone involved in the recent case. His voice remained steady as he spoke about a disturbing pattern he had observed over years on the bench. He discussed the recurring dynamics of abuse involving pregnant women. He mentioned how power control and money often silenced victims. He did not mention Hannah's name. He did not mention Grant. But the message was unmistakable. Viewers who respected Samuel's long career listened closely. His credibility carried weight. His calm analysis stood in stark contrast to Grant's emotional outbursts and Bella's staged tears. The interview was replayed throughout the day and then shared by thousands online. Meanwhile, Mary Collins continued her own offensive. She provided a respected investigative journalist with documents that revealed suspicious financial activities, offshore accounts, hidden transactions, sock puppet corporations, payments timed perfectly to coincide with events that helped Grant escape liability in the past. The journalist spent days verifying the information before publishing a groundbreaking exposé titled "From Angel of Innovation to Master Manipulator." The article spread rapidly across social media. It raised questions. It disturbed people who once saw Grant as a symbol of success. It hinted at a pattern not just of manipulation, but of criminal behavior. None of the accusations were definitive, but the connections were too sharp to ignore. Grant tried to control the damage. He appeared on live television shouting over the host. He accused journalists of lying. He claimed political enemies were targeting him. He threatened lawsuits against anyone who spoke against him. But each angry outburst chipped away at the image he had tried to build. Viewers who once admired him began to notice how quickly he lost control. They noticed how often he avoided direct questions. They noticed how hostility lived beneath his polished exterior. At the hospital, Mary arranged a brief, carefully controlled interview for Hannah. It lasted less than 5 minutes. A single camera captured Hannah sitting on the hospital bed with dimmed lights around her. She wore no makeup. She made no dramatic gestures. She spoke in a soft, steady voice. When asked what she wanted, she answered simply, "I just want my baby safe." That one sentence aired across the country. Elderly viewers sitting in living rooms across America felt something shift inside them. Women who had raised children decades earlier saw the quiet fear in Hannah's eyes and recognized it. Grandmothers remembered the dangers of pregnancy in their own youth. Mothers recognized the tremble in Hannah's voice. Older Americans who valued sincerity over spectacle began forming their own opinions. They were not moved by Bella's tears or Grant's rants. They were moved by the simplicity of a frightened mother trying to protect her child. Gradually, the tide of public opinion began shifting again. It did not happen with dramatic speed. It happened quietly in living rooms, retirement communities, church groups, and neighborhood gatherings. Older women especially felt protective toward Hannah. They shared her interview. They commented with prayers. They called in to radio shows to defend her. They saw her not as a figure in a scandal, but as a human being. Hashtags began circulating on social media. At first, they were small. Then they grew. Within days, #protect, Hannah started appearing beneath thousands of posts. It was followed by "Believe Pregnant Women," a powerful counterforce to Grant's campaign. The hashtags spread across platforms, accompanied by messages of solidarity. People demanded justice. People demanded safety for Hannah and her unborn child. People demanded accountability. Grant's PR team tried to fight back, but momentum had shifted. Their polished videos no longer drew admiration. Their claims of innocence no longer felt convincing. Grant had lost control of the narrative, And for the first time in his career, he was not the one steering public perception. Hannah, watching quietly from her hospital bed, felt the shift as well. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel safe. But she felt something new. She felt the world starting to see her truth. The tension in the hospital room felt different now. It was no longer the suffocating fear of isolation. It was the quiet stillness before movement. The sense that something larger had begun shifting in Hannah's favor. Her world was still fragile. Her baby was still at risk. But she no longer felt alone. Real help was forming around her, and it carried weight far beyond anything Grant could buy. Judge Samuel Hayes arrived early in the morning, his expression solemn but determined. He sat beside Hannah's bed and held a folder in his hands. He had already made the decision that would change everything. "I have officially withdrawn from your case," he said gently. "It is necessary. I cannot risk any conflict of interest, but that does not mean I am stepping away from you." Hannah looked at him, feeling a strange mixture of relief and fear. "So what happens now?" Samuel's voice softened. "Now I stand behind you as your father, and I will help you fight this battle from the outside." The words hit her with unexpected force. Hearing him say father still felt unreal, but it warmed something deep in her chest. She nodded slowly. Mary Collins joined them shortly after. She stood by the foot of the bed, flipping through a thick binder. "Since the judge has stepped back, we need reinforcements. People who know how to fight men like Grant. I have already reached out to someone." She glanced at Samuel, then at Hannah. "He is on his way." An hour later, a tall man in his 40s entered the room. He wore a dark coat and carried the seriousness of someone who had spent years navigating the darkest corners of financial crime. "I am Aaron Blake," he said, offering a respectful nod. "Former federal prosecutor. I spent 15 years investigating financial abuse among the wealthy. Judge Hayes and Mary told me enough to know this situation is bigger than domestic violence." He placed several documents on the small table beside Hannah's bed. "Grant Donovan is not simply an abuser. He shows a pattern. These money transfers, these offshore accounts, these sudden deaths. This is a system, a built structure of manipulation and financial cover-up." His words chilled Hannah. It was terrifying to hear her worst assumptions confirmed by a federal expert. Detective Michael Rhodes arrived next. The moment he entered, he carried a thick box filled with old files. He had been the detective who originally investigated the death of Grant's second wife before being abruptly removed. "I have contacts who never forgot that case," he told the group. "I spoke to them last night. They are afraid, but they are willing to help now that Donovan is finally under scrutiny." He opened the box and began laying items across the table. "This is the building security guard who saw the bruises. This is the neighbor who heard the shouting. This is the roommate who lived with Grant's second wife in college. She remembers the personality changes, the fear, the attempts to leave him." He picked up another statement. "And this, a delivery driver. 5 years ago, he saw Grant wrap his hand around her throat in their doorway. He reported it. The report disappeared the next day." Hannah inhaled sharply. She felt her pulse quicken with each revelation. She knew Grant was dangerous. She knew he hurt people. But seeing a network of erased voices laid out on the table made her knees weak. Helen entered the room soon after, holding a folder of her own. The hospital administration released these records after the attending physician was removed from his post. She said quietly, "You should see what he covered up." There were multiple reports of injuries on Grant's second wife. Their system flagged them, but the attending physician dismissed them each time. Now that he has been fired, we have access. She handed the folder to Mary, who opened it carefully. This is valuable, Mary said. These records build the medical foundation for a larger case. Then came the biggest shock of the morning. A man Hannah had never seen before stepped through the door. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. This is David Ross, Detective Rhodes explained, Grant's former personal driver. David rubbed his hands together. I should have come forward years ago, he said, but I was scared. I thought he would destroy my life. Mary spoke gently. What do you know? Mr. Ross. David looked down at the floor, gathering himself. 5 years ago, the night his second wife died, I drove Grant and Bella to a cabin outside the city. They stayed there until morning. They told me not to speak of it. Grant paid me to forget. I tried, but when I saw the news about Hannah, I knew I could not stay quiet anymore. Silence filled the room. Then Mary nodded firmly. Your testimony will matter. Aaron Blake began assembling the strategy. He laid the components on the table and spoke with the calm precision of someone accustomed to building airtight cases. First, we petition for search warrants. We need access to Grant's digital records, emails, messages, financial transfers. Second, we freeze his offshore accounts. Third, we prepare to bring Bella in for questioning. But will the court approve it? Hannah asked. With the right evidence, yes, Aaron said. And we are gathering more of it by the hour. Through all of this, Samuel stood quietly near the window watching Hannah's face. When Mary finally placed a DNA test kit on the tray beside her bed, he stepped closer. You do not have to take it, he said softly. But if you want certainty, I am ready. Hannah lifted the kit slowly. Her hands trembled. Samuel stood perfectly still, his emotions barely contained behind careful patience. After a moment of quiet reflection, she opened the kit. She followed the instructions. When she handed the sample to Mary for transport to the lab, she felt her breath catching. Hours passed. Evening settled outside the window. Nurses moved quietly through the halls. The fetal monitor continued its steady rhythm. Then the door opened again. Mary entered slowly, holding a sealed envelope. Hannah's heart raced. Samuel's face went pale. Mary placed the envelope on the table without speaking. Hannah opened it with shaking fingers. Positive. A clear and undeniable confirmation. Samuel Hayes was her biological father. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Hannah allowed herself to cry freely. And when Samuel stepped forward, tears in his own eyes, she placed her hand in his. He held it with trembling reverence, not as a judge, not as a stranger, but as a father meeting his daughter for the first time. The others in the room stepped back respectfully as the two shared a moment of quiet connection. It was brief, fragile, and extraordinary. When the moment passed, Aaron closed the files in front of him. We have everything we need, he said. Tonight, we prepare for the confrontation. At the center of the room, the Justice Alliance stood united. The night ahead would begin the battle that would expose everything Grant had tried so hard to bury. The ballroom of the Grand Seattle Hotel shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal lights as the annual charity gala began. Grant Donovan had chosen this night carefully. He wanted the world to see him as a symbol of compassion. He stepped onto the red carpet wearing a tailored black suit that gleamed under the cameras. Reporters shouted his name. Flash after flash painted his smile in bright white bursts that made him appear almost heroic. He raised his hand with a practiced gesture, looking every bit the philanthropic innovator the event promised to celebrate. Beside him walked Bella Hart, dressed in a flowing white gown that sparkled with sequins from shoulder to hem. She held Grant's arm tightly, tilting her head toward him with a soft expression that had been rehearsed for days. She wanted to appear gentle and misunderstood a woman caught in an unfortunate situation. Cameras captured her every angle. She let a few tears fall at the right moment, claiming she wished only for healing. Many people in the audience watched her with mixed reactions, unsure what to believe. Inside the ballroom, the decorations glittered with gold and ivory. A giant digital banner displayed the theme of the evening: empowering women in times of crisis. Grant had insisted on it. He believed nothing would cleanse his reputation faster than announcing a charitable fund. He wanted applause. He wanted admiration. He wanted forgiveness before anyone realized what he had done. Guests filled the tables in elegant attire. They murmured about headlines but tried to remain polite, unsure where the truth lay. Mary Collins, Aaron Blake. Detective Rhodes and Samuel Hayes entered through the VIP entrance. Their invitations had been arranged strategically so they could move within the crowd without raising suspicion. Mary wore a navy gown with a modest cut. Aaron and Rhodes dressed in dark suits. Samuel kept a calm expression, though tension simmered beneath his quiet composure. They did not speak much as they walked. They had prepared for this moment with meticulous care. Outside the building, a separate black vehicle arrived at a discreet side entrance. Hannah sat in a wheelchair wrapped in a warm coat that covered the medical bandaging around her abdomen. A nurse gently pushed her forward, while two security staff walked beside her. Hannah looked pale but determined. Her face was no longer clouded by helplessness. Instead, her eyes held a clear purpose. She knew tonight would determine her future and her baby's safety. A small group of staff escorted her through a quiet hallway. She breathed slowly to manage the discomfort in her ribs and stomach. Every movement reminded her of the violent attack that had pushed her here. Yet she refused to turn back. She had asked to be present. She wanted to see the truth revealed with her own eyes. She wanted to witness the moment when Grant's lies would crumble. Unbeknownst to most guests, an investigative journalist had placed discreet microphones beneath the stage earlier in the evening. The journalist had worked closely with Mary and Aaron to ensure no technical glitch could interrupt the reveal. The devices were hidden behind floral arrangements and small decorative panels. They would capture every sound on stage once the time came. Hannah's heartbeat quickened when she learned of the setup. She felt as if the entire room was a sealed chamber waiting to explode. Grant stepped onto the stage as the orchestra softened its music. He approached the microphone with an expression of deep sorrow. He placed his hand over his chest and bowed his head. His voice trembled as he began his speech. He spoke about compassion. He spoke about redemption. He claimed he wanted to support pregnant women in crisis. He even let a tear fall while describing how misunderstood he felt. Some guests clapped politely. Others watched uneasily, sensing something off. Bella stood nearby, clasping her hands together as if in prayer. She blinked dramatically whenever cameras focused on her. She wanted sympathy. She wanted validation. She wanted people to believe she had been the victim. Her white gown shimmered beneath the stage lights, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her calm facade. She kept glancing toward the audience, unsure why some faces looked too focused. Near the back of the ballroom, Aaron Blake caught Mary's eye. He gave a slow, deliberate signal. Mary pressed a small device in her hand. The giant screens mounted around the ballroom flickered once. The guests turned their heads, expecting another fundraising graphic. Instead, the screen went black for several seconds. Then the image appeared. The uncut courtroom footage. Gasps rose instantly. The video showed Hannah standing in the courtroom with her hands on her stomach. Bella appeared in the corner of the frame. Then the kick came sharply and brutally. The original sound filled the ballroom. Hannah's cry echoed through the speakers, The thud of impact vibrated beneath the audience's feet. Grant froze. Bella's face drained of color. The audience watched in horrified silence. No edits, no distortions, no excuses. It was clear evidence of violence. A wave of outrage rippled through the room as people placed their hands over their mouths. Some began shouting. Others stepped back from Grant and Bella as if they were toxic. Hannah watched from her wheelchair, her breath shaking. Another clip began playing. This time it showed financial records, offshore transactions, and interviews with witnesses. The voice of David Ross described the night he had driven Grant and Bella to a cabin while Grant's wife was dying. The ballroom erupted with noise. Guests shouted in disbelief. People stood from their seats. Phones recorded everything. The truth spread faster than Grant could react. Grant lunged toward the stage controls, screaming for someone to shut off the screen. Bella stumbled backward, shaking violently. Before either could flee, federal agents rushed through the side doors. The agents announced themselves with clear, commanding voices. They moved with practiced precision. Grant was seized in full view of the cameras. Bella tried to slip through the crowd, but two agents intercepted her quickly. The applause that followed was not joyous. It was furious. It was the sound of long overdue justice. Hannah felt tears rise not from pain but from relief. Samuel moved to her side, placing his hand over hers. The flashes of cameras illuminated their faces as they watched Grant and Bella taken away. The truth had finally been revealed. The night of revelation had begun the end. The federal courthouse in Seattle buzzed with an intensity that could be felt even from the street. Reporters crowded the entrance, setting up tripods and microphones as helicopters circled overhead. People lined the sidewalks hoping to witness history. Inside, security officers prepared for a trial that would shake the entire country. The fall of Grant Donovan, once celebrated as a visionary billionaire, had captured the nation's attention. He arrived in handcuffs, surrounded by federal marshals. His face showed the marks of a struggle. A bruise swelled beneath his left eye, and a cut along his cheek had been hastily bandaged. He had resisted arrest the night of the gala, and his injuries reflected both his desperation and his refusal to accept defeat. He walked with a stiff posture, trying to hold on to whatever dignity he had left. But the cameras were relentless, capturing his downfall with merciless clarity. Bella Hart appeared shortly after. The dazzling woman who once posed confidently on red carpets now looked almost unrecognizable. Her hair hung limp at her shoulders. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She held her arms tightly against her body as if trying to shrink into herself. She glanced nervously at Grant, but he refused to look at her. 2 days earlier, she had attempted to negotiate a reduced charge by blaming him entirely. She was now trapped between fear and survival, desperately trying to salvage what little hope she had. Inside the courtroom, former federal prosecutor Aaron Blake stood at the front organizing documents with steady hands. He wore a dark suit that carried the authority of years spent pursuing justice. When the judge entered and announced the beginning of the proceedings, Aaron stepped forward. He spoke with clarity and force, laying out the case. He began with the unedited video from the courtroom. The footage appeared on the large screen. Gasps echoed through the room as Bella's violent kick played in slow motion. The raw sound of Hannah's cry filled the courtroom. No one could deny what they saw. No one could explain it away. Next came the financial evidence. Aaron presented charts, spreadsheets, and banking reports that revealed a complex network of offshore accounts. He explained how millions of dollars had moved in suspicious patterns over several years. The transfers were linked to key moments surrounding the death of Grant's second wife. The dots connected with chilling precision. He then introduced the hospital records. Nurse Helen had uncovered them after the corrupt physician was removed. Aaron presented photographs of the bruising on the second wife, along with testimonies showing how reports were suppressed. The room fell into a heavy silence. It was no longer just a story about one attack. It was a story of a pattern, a history, a system designed by Grant Donovan to maintain control and eliminate anyone who threatened him. One by one, the witnesses took the stand. David Ross, the former driver, testified first. His voice trembled slightly as he described the night he drove Grant and Bella to a secluded cabin while the second wife was left alone at the penthouse. He admitted he had been paid. Stay quiet. His fear was palpable, but his conviction was stronger now. Then came the building security guard. He spoke about the bruises he had seen but had been told to ignore. The friend and former roommate of the second wife testified next. She recounted the emotional breakdowns, the fear and the threats the woman had confided. The delivery driver who had witnessed Grant choking his wife followed. His testimony brought several jurors to the edge of tears. Finally, Nurse Helen walked steadily to the stand. Her calm voice carried the weight of truth. She described the day she had examined the second wife. She explained how she had wanted to document the injuries, but the attending physician blocked her. She admitted she had kept that memory for years, unable to forget the desperation in the patient's eyes. Cameras captured the solemn expression of the jurors as they listened. It became clear that every piece fit together. Hours into the proceedings, the bailiff opened the side door. Hannah entered the courtroom in her wheelchair, pushed gently by a nurse. She wore a loose blouse to avoid pressing against the bandages around her abdomen. Her face looked pale, but resolute. She held her stomach instinctively as the wheels rolled forward. The room fell silent. She positioned herself near the witness table. When she began to speak, her voice shook, but never broke. He tried to erase me, just like the others. The courtroom felt frozen in time. Even the judge paused before taking the next note. Hannah continued explaining how Grant isolated her, threatened her, and manipulated her. She spoke about the kick, the terror of losing her child, and the long nights listening to the fetal monitor for reassurance. Not a single person in the room looked away. Grant's attorney rose to cross-examine her. His tone lacked conviction. His questions came out hesitant and weak. Each argument he attempted crumbled against the undeniable weight of evidence. The judge rejected most of his objections. Even Grant could not hide his frustration. He slammed his cuffed hands against the table, earning a warning from the judge. Then came the breaking point. Bella collapsed into tears at the defense table. She begged to speak. The judge allowed it only after repeated requests. She stood shakily and admitted that Grant had often belittled her and controlled her. She said he viewed pregnant women as burdens. She repeated the chilling words he once said. "She is pregnant. She is just a weight. I will handle it." Her confession hit the courtroom like a blow. Gasps erupted. Grant's face twisted with rage. He shouted that she was lying, but the guards forced him back into his seat. The judge called for order. When silence finally returned, he delivered the verdict. Grant Donovan was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Bella Hart received 18 years for her role as an accomplice. The room erupted in emotional release. Hannah covered her face with her hands and sobbed. The weight of months of fear and pain poured out of her. Samuel Hayes moved quickly to her side. He knelt beside her wheelchair, holding her hand in both of his. His forehead trembled as he tried to speak, but emotion overcame him. "You are safe now," he whispered. Hannah lowered her hands slowly, tears still streaming down her cheeks. She felt a faint movement inside her belly, a tiny kick, a quiet reassurance. Her baby was still there, still fighting, still alive, and for the first time, she felt they had truly won. The days following the verdict felt like stepping into a different world. The fear that had once clung to Hannah's every breath slowly loosened. Her doctors told her that her vital signs had stabilized. The bruising around her ribs had begun to fade. The tension that had wrapped itself around her belly seemed to soften little by little. She held on to hope with cautious hands. Each morning, she listened to the gentle sound of her baby's heartbeat on the monitor and let it calm her spirit. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, her daughter arrived. The delivery room glowed with warm lights, and the nurses spoke gently as they worked. Hannah held onto the sides of the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pushed through the final moments of labor. When the newborn's cry filled the room, Hannah felt a wave of gratitude so deep it left her shaking. The nurse placed the tiny girl in her arms, wrapped in a soft hospital blanket. Hannah gazed at her daughter's face and whispered her name, Grace. Grace's small fingers curled around Hannah's thumb as if claiming her place in the world. Hannah pressed her lips to the infant's forehead, letting the warmth of her tiny body settle into her heart. For the first time since the attack, she felt whole again. The door opened quietly, and Samuel stepped into the room. He moved slowly as if afraid to disturb the moment. Hannah looked up at him with tired eyes and smiled. "Would you like to hold her?" Samuel froze, overwhelmed. His eyes glistened. He nodded silently and reached out his trembling hands. Hannah placed Grace gently into his arms. Samuel's breath hitched. He stared at the little girl as if she were a miracle he never expected to receive. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered a greeting to his granddaughter. He laughed softly, unable to contain his emotion. Hannah watched him and felt something inside her mend. Later that afternoon, Mary, Aaron Rhodes, and Helen arrived together. They carried flowers and small gifts, but what mattered most was the warmth in their voices. They gathered around the bed, smiling with genuine pride. "Look at her," Mary said softly. "A perfect little fighter." Aaron nodded. "You changed everything, Hannah. You gave every victim a voice. You forced the system to listen." Rhodes leaned forward, smiling warmly. "She is going to grow up strong, just like her mother." Helen brushed a hand over the blanket. "I cannot wait to tell her one day how brave you were. You saved her life before she ever took her first breath." Hannah listened to them with tears in her eyes. She squeezed their hands, grateful for each of them. They had not only defended her, they had saved her and her daughter. In the days that followed, the news continued to spread across the country. Articles appeared in major publications describing Grant Donovan's crimes and the evidence that had brought him down. Reporters interviewed former employees, financial analysts, and legal experts. The story of the gala revelation became a symbol of accountability. The charity fund Grant had falsely promoted was now under the management of legitimate organizations dedicated to women escaping abusive homes. Donations poured in from people moved by Hannah's courage. When Hannah was discharged, Samuel drove her to a small apartment he had quietly renovated. It was not extravagant, but it was filled with light and soft colors. Fresh paint covered the walls. A crib stood near the window, decorated with a simple mobile of tiny wooden stars. Fresh curtains fluttered gently in the spring breeze. Hannah stepped inside with Grace in her arms and felt a rush of emotion. She had never expected to have a place that felt safe, but now she did. Samuel helped her settle Grace into the crib. Then he walked to a small shelf on the wall. He placed a framed photograph of Laura Miller, taken many years earlier. Beside it, he set another frame. It held the only picture Hannah had from her childhood, a small photo of herself with her mother. And next to those two, he added the newest frame holding a picture of Grace, taken only hours after birth. 3 generations side by side. Hannah watched quietly, as Samuel adjusted the frames until they were perfectly aligned. She pressed a hand to her heart, feeling the depth of the moment. Something inside her felt complete. She began taking short walks in the neighborhood when her strength returned. She pushed Grace's stroller beneath the soft morning sunlight. The sky always looked gentler during those early hours. The world felt calm, almost sacred. Hannah inhaled the cool air, feeling her body regain its steadiness. People she passed on the sidewalk sometimes recognized her from the news, but they approached her kindly. Some offered quiet congratulations, others simply smiled. Hannah felt lighter than she had in months. Samuel eventually moved into the apartment next door. He insisted it made sense. He wanted to be close. He wanted to help with Grace. Hannah did not argue. Having him nearby brought comfort she never expected to feel again. He knocked each morning to check on them. He brought warm meals and small gifts for Grace. He took pictures of her first smiles and recorded the sound of her tiny breath when she slept. One evening, as Grace lay asleep in her crib, Hannah sat at her small desk with a pen in hand. She opened a blank journal. She began to write a letter. It was addressed to any woman who felt trapped, afraid, or alone. Her words flowed steadily. You are not alone. You are stronger than you know. And there are people who will fight for you if you let them. Your life has meaning. Your story matters. She hoped her message would reach someone who needed it. The apartment was quiet as dawn approached. Gentle sunlight filtered through the curtains and fell across Grace's crib. Hannah walked to her daughter's side and placed a hand near her tiny chest. She felt the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing. Grace's fingers twitched in her sleep. Her world was just beginning. The light grew brighter, the first morning of a new chapter. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt open.